I am 71 years old. 2 years ago, I lived in a three-bedroom Cape Cod house on Rosewood Lane in a small suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. It was mine. It had been mine since 1986. Today I sleep in a single room I rent in a senior boarding house on the east side of the city. I pay $620 a month. I have a twin bed, a small dresser, a desk where I eat, and a window that looks out onto a parking lot. I did not lose my house because I borrowed money. I did not lose my house because I owed taxes. I did not lose my house because I made a bad investment. I lost my house because of one signature. One single signature I gave for my son in 2010. My name is Dorothy Lane, and I came here to say this because I do not want another mother to sign what I signed. I was born in 1955, in a small town in southern Ohio. My father was a railroad worker. My mother took in laundry. I came to Cleveland at 19 to work as a secretary at an insurance company on Euclid Avenue. That is where I met Howard, who was my husband for 38 years, until he passed away in 2017. We bought that house in 1986. I was 31, Howard was 35. It was a three-bedroom Cape Cod, white siding, green shutters, a small backyard with a maple tree he had planted the spring our boy was born. We paid it off over 22 years. 22 years of mortgage payments without ever missing once. I still have the deed in a drawer, signed off in 2008. In 1988, our son Michael was born, our only child. We tried for another, but it never happened. So Michael was everything. He was the joy of that house. He was the reason we had fought so hard to own it. He was who we thought that maple tree would belong to one day. I watched that boy grow up inside those walls. I watched him take his first steps in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room. I watched him climb on the furniture. I watched him do his homework at the kitchen table. I watched him graduate from high school, then from Ohio State, and move out at 22 to start his career in Pittsburgh. It was September of 2010 when he came home for a Sunday dinner and told us he had found an apartment. It was a one-bedroom in Shadyside, in Pittsburgh, $1,100 a month. For a young man who had just been hired by a marketing firm, it was tight, but he could make it work. He said this: "Mom, the problem is that the leasing office wants a cosigner, and they only accept cosigners who own a paid-off home in a state where they have records." I looked at Howard. He looked at me. We had already talked between ourselves about this kind of moment, the moment when Michael was going to need us for something like this. We had always known that day would come, and when it came, we said yes. It was a parent's yes, automatic. I still remember the afternoon we went to sign. It was a Tuesday. Michael drove down from Pittsburgh that morning. We met at a property management office in downtown Cleveland on Superior Avenue. A young woman in a dark blazer brought us into a conference room. She was polite, professional, quick. She placed a packet of papers in front of us, maybe 16 pages, and she pointed at the spots where we needed to sign, marked with little yellow tabs. Did we read it? I wish I could say we read it. I wish I could say I read every line, that I asked what every clause meant, that I was careful, that I asked to take a copy home. But I did none of that. I looked at the rent amount. I looked at the lease term, which was 12 months, and I signed. Howard did the same. We signed thinking we were committing to 12 months. We were out of that office in 15 minutes. I left that office with the feeling of a job well done. I had helped my son. I had been the mother he needed. We took Michael to a diner on Lakeside Avenue afterward, and I remember Howard saying that it was good to be able to help while we still could. I did not know what an automatic renewal clause was. I did not know what a continuing guarantee was. I did not know that buried in those 16 pages, on page 11, in the smallest print I had ever seen, there was a sentence that said the cosigner's obligation continued for the duration of the tenancy, including any renewals, modifications, and rent increases, and could only be released by the formal surrender of possession by the tenant. That afternoon, I did not walk out with a cosigner agreement for 12 months. I walked out with one that would last as long as Michael lived in that apartment. 13 years later, I would learn what that meant. The years went by. Michael stayed in that apartment. He did well. He moved up at the marketing firm, became an account director, then a vice president. He traded cars twice. He drove to Cleveland every Christmas, every Mother's Day, every Father's Day, religiously. We laughed, we argued, we lived what every family lives. Nobody ever spoke about that lease again. I never heard from that property management company again. Michael never said a word about late rent, about renewals, about anything. To me, that whole thing had ended in 2011, when the 12 months were up. I had erased that afternoon from my mind the way you erase an old doctor's appointment. It was past. It was closed. In April of 2017, Howard had a heart attack at home. He was washing dishes after dinner. I heard him fall in the kitchen. I called 911. They came in 7 minutes. He was gone before they arrived. He was 66. We had been married for 38 years. That year I buried my husband, finished the probate, and put the house in my name alone. Michael helped me through everything. He came home for 2 weeks and stayed in his old room. He drove me to the lawyer, the bank, the funeral home. He was an excellent son during that time. It was during that period that I most thanked God for the boy I had. I was a widow at 63. I started learning to live alone in a house that had become too big. I went back to my church on Sundays. I joined a quilting circle at the community center. I started walking 3 miles every morning around the neighborhood with Edith from across the street. Life went on. Quieter, slower, lonelier, but it went on. In the fall of 2022, Michael came home for Thanksgiving, and he was different. Thinner, quieter. His clothes hung loose. He had always been a careful man with his appearance. That Thanksgiving, he was not. He told me he had been let go from the firm. He did not say if he had been fired or if he had been part of layoffs. He said he was going to start something on his own. Some consulting work. He sounded confident. I asked him if he was all right with money. He said yes, that he had savings, that everything was going to be fine. He said maybe he would need a hand later, but for now he was steady. I believed him. Why would I not believe him? He was my son. He was 34 years old, college educated, with a career he had built for over a decade. I had no reason to doubt. What I did not know, that Thanksgiving, was that Michael was already 2 months behind on the rent in Pittsburgh. In February of 2023, I got the first letter. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I was in the backyard, raking leaves around the maple tree, when the mail truck stopped at the curb. It was a certified letter, return receipt requested, addressed to Dorothy Lane, from a law firm in Pittsburgh I had never heard of. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where my son had done his homework. I put on my reading glasses. I opened the envelope carefully, with that polite slowness you have with letters that look important. It was a demand letter. It said that I, Dorothy Lane, in my capacity as co-signer of the lease agreement signed on October 14, 2010, for the apartment in Shadyside, owed the sum of $14,840. Past due rent, late fees, interest, and attorney's fees. I had 30 days to pay or to respond. I read it 3 times. It made no sense. That lease was from 2010. I had signed it 13 years before. I was certain it had ended. How could I owe almost $15,000 on something I thought was over in 2011? How could nobody have warned me that the lease was still active? How could Howard, who had been dead for almost 6 years, still be named on the demand? I called Michael that same day. He answered on the 3rd try. I read him the letter, line by line, standing in the kitchen with my reading glasses sliding down my nose. He told me to calm down. He told me it was a mistake by the management company. He told me he had been a few months behind, but he was sorting it out, that he was going to talk directly to the landlord, that I should not worry, that I should throw the letter away and forget about it. He said in 2 weeks it would all be fixed. I did not throw it away. But I believed him. If you are listening to me right now and you are around my age, I need to ask you something. Look at this screen and answer me, even if it is just to yourself. Have you ever signed something for your son? Any contract, any cosigner agreement, any guarantee? And do you still remember exactly what was written on that paper? If the answer is no, please stay until the end of this video, because what I am going to tell you next was what I did not know when I got that letter, and I do not want you to find out the way I found out. If this video is reaching you, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment, even a short one. I read all of them. And knowing that someone is listening, after everything I have lived through, is what makes me keep telling this. I did not throw the letter away, but I also did not call a lawyer. In February of 2023, I trusted my son. I thought he would handle it. That was my mistake. In April, the second letter came. This time it was not from the law firm. It was from the court. It was a summons, served by a process server who knocked on my door on a Tuesday morning. The owner of the apartment, a man named Albert Sanders, had filed a civil suit against Michael, against me, and against Howard. Howard had been dead for almost 6 years, but his name was on the summons, because his name was on the lease. The debt was no longer $14,000, it was $24,600. In 2 months it had grown by almost $10,000. Past due rent, late fees, interest, additional attorney's fees, and court costs. I called Michael. He did not answer. I called again. He did not answer. I called 5 more times that afternoon. He called me back that night, almost 10 o'clock. He said he could not pay right now. He said his consulting business was not working. He said he would pay. Of course he would pay, but he needed time. He said I should hire a lawyer to buy us some time, to file a response, to delay things. Hire a lawyer. That was the first time in that conversation that I understood this was serious. That was the first time I thought maybe I should pull out a copy of the lease and read it for real, 13 years later. I went to see Mr. Green, the attorney who had handled Howard's estate. I brought him a copy of the lease, the demand letter, and the summons. He read in silence for 20 minutes. Then he took off his glasses, set them on the desk, and looked at me. He said this: "Mrs. Lane, the guarantee runs for the duration of the tenancy. That is paragraph 9. You are going to be sued for every month of unpaid rent, plus late fees, plus interest, plus attorney's fees, plus court costs. And if your son does not pay, and from what you are telling me he is not going to pay, the creditor is going to come after your assets." I asked him what coming after my assets meant. He said, "The house on Rosewood Lane, Mrs. Lane." I do not remember saying anything else in that meeting. I remember taking the bus home. I remember getting off at my stop. I remember looking at the front of my house, at the maple tree Howard had planted in 1988, the year Michael was born, and thinking a sentence that stayed in my head for months. This house can be taken from me. I tried everything. I tried to talk to Mr. Sanders, the owner, by phone. He was polite but firm. He told me he was 79 years old. He told me that rent had been part of his retirement income for 20 years. He told me he was sorry for my situation, but the problem was my son, not him. I tried to talk to Michael. He started disappearing. He answered 1 call out of 5. He said he would fix it, that he had a new client, that in 2 months everything would settle. It was always 2 months. The 2 months never came. I tried to sell my car, a Honda Accord from 2015. I got $9,000 for it. I offered it to Mr. Sanders. He took it as a partial payment, but the debt was already at $36,000. The $9,000 barely covered a quarter. I sold the wedding band Howard had given me in 1979. I sold his pocket watch from his grandfather. I sold a small diamond brooch that had belonged to my mother. I took it all to a jeweler in Lakewood. I got just over $2,000. I cried in the parking lot afterward, because it was the first time in my life I had sold anything Howard had given me. In November of 2023, Michael disappeared. He stopped answering. He stopped responding to text messages. His social media went silent. I drove out to Pittsburgh on a Saturday with a Tupperware of meatloaf, the way I had done for years. He did not live there anymore. The landlord had stopped accepting his attempts to pay and had put his belongings in storage at his own expense. I came back to Cleveland not knowing where my son was. At 65 years old, alone in a house that was beginning to be taken from me. In May of 2024, the judgment came down. The house on Rosewood Lane was attached. Mr. Green filed a motion. He raised the homestead exemption, my age, my widowhood. The judge denied it. He said that under Ohio law, the homestead protection has limits, and that in cases of guarantee for a residential lease, the family home is fully reachable by creditors when the debt exceeds the exemption amount, which it did, by a long margin. I had never heard that in my life. I had always heard that a family home was sacred, that a family home could not be taken from anyone. I learned that was not exactly true. I learned there was a limit, and that I had landed exactly on the wrong side of that limit. Mr. Green appealed. The appellate court affirmed the lower court. He told me there was nothing more he could do without spending years and money I did not have. I told him to stop. In January of 2025, the sheriff's sale was scheduled. Mr. Green called to tell me. He said, "Do not go." He said it would not change anything, that I would only hurt myself more. I went anyway. It was a Tuesday morning, 10 o'clock, in a courthouse hallway downtown. I got there half an hour early. I sat on a bench in the back. There were maybe 18 people there. Investors, men in suits, people with briefcases. I was the only old woman in that hallway, the only one who had come to watch something die. When it started, the deputy called the lot. 3-bedroom, single-family residence in suburban Cleveland, 1,410 square feet, opening bid $120,000. It was over fast. The bids came in. My house, which had been appraised at $270,000, was sold in 9 minutes for $178,000. To an investment company. After the debt was paid, the interest, the attorney's fees, the court costs, and the sheriff's commission, what was left for me was $36,200. 39 years living there. $36,200. I left that hallway, took the bus home, and walked back into the house that had just stopped being mine. I had 60 days to vacate. It was during those 60 days that I understood the worst thing about all of this. I had always thought the worst part had been the sale. I was wrong. The worst was when I sat on the floor of the empty living room on the last day, with all the boxes packed, waiting for the moving truck. And I looked through the window at the maple tree Howard had planted in 1988, and at the rose bushes he had planted in 1994, and I realized I was never going to see those plants in bloom again, because the house was leaving with them inside. I understood on that empty living room floor that I had not just lost a house, I had lost 40 years of my life. The house where my son had taken his first steps, the house where my husband had died, the house where I had planned to grow old, the house I had worked my entire life to pay off, the house that was supposed to be what I left to Michael in the end, and that ended up being what I paid for Michael's mistake. I had lost all of that for a 15-second signature in an office in downtown Cleveland in 2010. Today I live in this boarding house on the east side. I pay $620 a month. The $36,000 that was left from the sale is in a savings account, and at this rate it gives me about 2 more years of rent and basic expenses. After that, I do not know. I get a small Social Security survivor benefit from Howard that pays for groceries, my blood pressure medication, and the bus fare. I do not have a car anymore. I do not have a yard. I do not have room to have anyone over. I stopped going to my church because it is across town now, and the bus takes an hour. I see Edith from the old neighborhood at the senior center every other Wednesday, but we do not have much to say. She still lives there. I do not. And I have not seen Michael in 8 months. The last time I spoke to him was last September, 3 months before the sale. He called from a number I did not recognize. He said he was in Florida. He said he was working construction. He said he was going to send me money as soon as he could. He said he was sorry. I could not answer. I hung up. I did not hang up out of anger. I hung up because I had no words at that moment. I had lost the house because of him, and he was apologizing on the phone from a different state, and I had nothing left to say. I think he understood. He has not called again. I do not hate my son. That is the hardest part to explain to whoever is listening. I do not hate him. He is my son. He made a mistake that will weigh on him for the rest of his life. I think he is paying, in his own way, in silence, far away. But I also cannot stop thinking, every morning, when I wake up in that boarding house, about the house I built. If you have stayed with me this long, I need to ask you one thing. If you co-signed any lease, any loan, any guarantee for your son or your daughter or your nephew or your grandchild, go find that contract today, tonight even. Read it carefully, with your reading glasses, with patience. Look for a sentence that talks about continuing obligation, about automatic renewal, about co-signer release only by surrender of possession. If that sentence is there, talk to a lawyer, talk to the other party. Try to formally exit that contract, in writing. And if anyone in your family asks you to co-sign something new, today or tomorrow or next month, read everything before. Read it at home, not in their office. Do not trust anyone to read it for you. Do not trust me. Do not trust your own son. Read it yourself. Read it twice. I am not here asking for pity. I am here so that you do not go through what I went through. Don't do what I did. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this testimony has helped you, send this video to someone around my age, someone who maybe co-signed something a long time ago and never thought about it again. You may help save that person's home. You may keep that person from sleeping, 2 years from now, in a boarding house like I am. I am Dorothy Lane. This was the story of a signature I gave in 2010, on a rainy afternoon, in 15 seconds. May what I said here help someone. That is what I came for.